So I would like to welcome you once again, and for the second panel, which will be related to trade and economic issues and economic and trade impact, which could be emanating from Trump's presidency. That's why we have mainly economists and business people on the panel. We also have two American citizens or dual citizens. We have Ondřej Jonáš, who is an investment banker. We have Jan Švejnar, who you know very well, the most famous or most quoted Czech economist in scientific journals and professor at Columbia University currently and founder of Search EI, etc. We have Petr Fudil from BPD Group, who is here because his company is a large investor in the United States, so he has to get ready for the new future also. And we have Jiří Schwarz, who I have to thank. Jiří Schwarz is a Czech economist who is also a president of AAU, who was so very kind to organize these discussions together with us. So welcome all of you. And I would sit down and I would start with the most hot issue, which Trump. I expect many clashes between European Union and European establishments and European institutions and Trump's policies that are articulated in his political program. So we definitely expect tensions with climate change, because US will get out of all these, leave all these agreements like Paris Agreement. We can expect clashes as far as the moderation and regulation of social networks is concerned, which has to do with regulating big American technological companies in Europe. Once again, we can expect a wave of emotions and disagreement. But the most hot issue is perhaps with the tariffs, because we know that, and we could hear it in the debates, that Trump fell in love with tariffs, and he would be happy to impose tariffs not only for adversaries and enemies, but he would be happy to impose tariffs for allies and friends. So he even mentioned that he would impose 10% tariffs on most of European exports to the US. So what is it, can we really expect that he will fulfill his word, and what's going to mean for Europe, and what is going to mean with for the business? And perhaps tariffs started to be a little bit forgotten in economic theory. During the last debate here, Ondřej Jonáš actually remembered the role of tariffs in American history, and so perhaps it might be interesting that if we start with you, Ondřej, today. So what do you expect is going to happen with the tariffs, and will we have to learn to live with high tariffs again?
I think the focus will be on China. We're hearing a great deal about Europe, but I think Washington is much more focused on China, and China can expect indeed 60% tariffs. I would like to add to Mr. Zavradil's comment. Abraham Lincoln introduced 50% tariffs. In fact, the Civil War was in large part fought over tariffs. And if you look at Alexander Hamilton's argument with Thomas Jefferson, tariffs also played a great role. And indeed, the federal government was funded uniquely through tariffs up until 1913. So to claim that tariffs are a no-no, yes, we all know about David Ricardo and Adam Smith. And if Portugal produces good wine and England has a surplus of wool, then between friends, people who respect the same laws and who do not steal intellectual property, trade is beneficial for both sides. But the moment the production of your antibiotics, for instance, become dependent on certain intermediary chemicals that are produced only in China, you are in trouble. So you have to look a little bit more deeply into what the purpose of imposing tariffs is, to say whether they make sense or not. And in this case, the two examples that I gave, they do make sense. You want to shorten supply lines. You want to force certain countries to produce in the US if they sell a great deal of their produce in the US. I think that the countervailing force, which nobody seems to mention, is that American firms have a great deal of investment in Europe. And likewise, European firms have a huge amount of investment in North America. In fact, if you look at Mario Draghi's very impressive statement, and I haven't read all 600 pages, but if you read the first 12, you come across one very interesting figure. And that is that on an annual basis, there's some 500 billion euros of capital that flow from Europe towards North America. So when Trump wants to impose tariffs on the importation of cars, and I believe the balance of trade, and Jan will correct me, is just a little shy of 200 billion a year. On the other side of that, you have on the capital account substantial capital flows that flow from Europe to North America, and they're very substantial. Why? Because that's where innovation takes place. That's where companies like NVIDIA and Apple and Google are based. And is there anyone who doesn't invest in the top 7 companies in North America in this room? Probably not. I will not ask for a show of hands. The point is that over the 50 years that I've been coming to Europe, I would always get the question of, where's the European Bill Gates or Steve Jobs, or today somebody like Elon Musk. If you want growth, if you want innovation, if you want capital appreciation, you're almost forced to go to the only capital market in the world that has the depth and the liquidity that you demand. And this is also one of the key requirements that Mario Draghi mentioned, that Europe should unify its capital markets to fund some of the ventures that the EU hopes to put through. And I'm actually quite optimistic because I think Ursula von der Leyen commissioned these 2 key reports. And certainly the one from Mario Draghi not only lays out what has to be done, but also puts a dollar or euro amount, the amount of investment that Europe must make to at least come up with a unified foreign policy and security policy. So maybe we can get into that as well.
Okay, and now Petr Pudil.
Is it better now? Yeah, okay. So regarding tariffs, look, we as a people which represent business in this panel, we anticipated such a development many years ago. And I think that such a trajectory will be visible also with Democrats, not maybe with such a drastic like a tariffs plan like Trump, but basically there is a quite decent tension between US and China, and you can call it decoupling, de-risking, or tariff revolution. All these policies have the same aim to get the production back to United States. So I think for business, it's quite visible that if you want to supply customers in US, but actually not only in US. I just finished on one visit in India, and I heard a very similar language from Indian government. If you want to do, you have a fantastic products, we need them, but if you want to sell it here, you have to produce it here. The other question is if they have the same conditions like US to do that, but for us, it's not a surprise. Obviously, there is a lot of doubts if such a plan could be really done in a scale which Donald Trump is talking about, especially if you put it in the context with his migration policy. Then I have a doubt that you really have someone who would work in these new American factories. Even for us, it's very difficult to find people in US, not only for Draslovka, but also for many other companies in US. So a very similar situation like in Europe. So, and if you close the door for migration, you are in trouble. I'm not speaking about sending 20 million people back to their homes outside of US. And you correctly mentioned that there is a big difference between US and Europe regarding the capital market, and we are actually the perfect example of that. We just received a award last week for the fastest growing Czech company. I'm not overestimating that there are also many others, but our success is fully financed by American investors. We have a very limited capital provided by European banks or funds, simply because we Europeans don't like a risk. But without risk, there is no profit. But I think that Trump could be a really good catalyst for Europe to make all these changes, which are, I think, perfectly written in the Draghi report. So that's my initial remark, that don't take it as only like a panic news, but take it as a more like a stimulus for reforms in the right direction.
All right, so I agree with everything that was said. So just to add to it a sort of complementary perspective, the one aspect to worry about is the unpredictability. There is a significant amount of uncertainty as to what will be done, and that's always a negative aspect for business, for people, etc. More certainty is better than less certainty. So I think that most likely extreme things will not happen, but if there were to be huge tariffs that were to be erected, it's most likely that the trade partners would reciprocate. That's normal, right? So if huge tariff walls were erected all over, the world economy would go down. There is no question. It would shrink, okay? And yeah, it's one thing that the Americans could not drink Slivovitz from Bizovice, but so living standards would go down on that account. But it's, the Great Depression of the last century obviously had that important element in it, right? So the question is, how high will the tariff go? Well, Trump promised that he would continue the reduction of taxes that he already implemented and that are to be expired, and obviously wants to reduce taxes even more to stimulate the economy. So he has a sense where he would like the US economy to do better, but to finance that, he needs the tariff revenue, right? So there is this dilemma as to how far it'll go. It could be relatively benign. The estimates of the last wave of tariffs is that, yes, prices did go up, etc., but it wasn't huge. The shock was not major. Right? So it could be minor, it could be major. So that's the uncertainty, unpredictability about it. The bout of inflation that will go with it could maybe be benign, maybe it would destabilize things because people are now very sensitive to price rises. They weren't so much before. So again, an uncertainty on that account. Right? So that's sort of an example of what is likely to be happening or might be happening. And alongside with it, situation vis-a-vis China, the Democrats and Republicans are pretty much on agreement that they have to be or want to be tough on China. What exactly that will mean is not clear, and the Chinese are not going to take it totally, taking it without reaction to it. So I think that the global economy is less or is more uncertain now than it was in the past. And I think that the US economy, being as resilient, innovative, and everything as it is, will come out of it relatively unscathed. And I think that the European economy is going to be the one that's going to more suffer, precisely because it's more vulnerable. It has shown it cannot innovate as much. And go back to around 1990, Europe and Japan pretty much caught up with the United States economically after World War II. Question was where Europe was going to overtake the United States. Well, it didn't, right? It missed the trend towards digital economy. Question is, will it miss the train for AI now or not, right? So Europe has a much greater challenge, which Draghi is very well describing in his report. And I would say, that's where the big question mark is for Europe and the Czech Republic as we are sitting here. So let me start with that, and then we can go deeper into it.
Thank you. So easy.
Thank you. So it's difficult to add now anything to these presentations, but maybe from the perspective of the Czech Republic and the small European open economies. These US isolation and focus on protecting domestic markets, so it's really dangerous for smaller markets, because the US and bigger markets, so they are able to manage their supply and production chains. So they are able to drive something like this friend-shoring. And we are not able due to our size of our economy. So the size of economy really matters. And these European, smaller, partialized markets, they will have a really very hard time with accommodating the change in the global trade. So we are facing several years something like deglobalization. And deglobalization is connected with reduction of free trade. And free trade was something what made this advanced economy wealthy and rich and just enable just to achieve the highest standard livings in the world. And now the processes we are facing, that means closing economies, focus on national issues, that is something what is just against the global trends that made these advanced countries to be rich in the past. And that is something that somebody will need to pay for it. And I am quite afraid that Europe will be the part of the world that will pay for this adventure.
Thank you, Jiří. And I would like to now to go to another topic or another point of potential clashes or tensions between the US and Europe, and this has to do with the US leaving the climate agreements and all kinds of agreements of green policies, which it certainly has a huge impact and will have a huge impact on businesses. So what's your take on this? What's going to be the impact on our relationship, business relationship between Europe and US?
Well, as you've probably divined, I follow the money. And there's so much money invested in new technology, better ways to store energy, new batteries. There are some very clever ways to distribute energy. I often wonder why the Czechs put billions into Dukovany and Temelín, when what they should be really putting money into is a better distribution network throughout Europe, so that over the next 70 years, Czech companies and Czech households would have access to the lowest cost energy over that time. See, the risk from my point of view is that you pay a huge amount of money, I want to be polite, for another block in Dukovany or Temelín. Yes, you are assured of having energy, but what if it's twice as expensive as energy at that time in your neighboring countries? I think that is a huge financial risk. It's not one that I would sign on for. So the answer to your question is that the climate crisis will be solved by innovation. And there are some very clever people who, if you look back over the past 20 years, the amount of innovation in energy in that space is huge. I would not bet that there would be nothing discovered over the next 70 years. So that's why I would be very cautious in this space. Clever people come up with fantastic things all the time, and I would want to keep open the option of actually benefiting and profiting from that.
Can I add to it? So I think this is key, and the emphasis on efficient capital markets and so on is very important. And I would just to add that Europe is not poor in capital in the sense that the global capital looks everywhere in the world. And the fact that it's not investing here as much as it is in the United States means the environment for it is not seen as being as advantageous as it is somewhere else. And let me add another aspect to it. Human capital is very important. Okay? In the United States, when there is a census of capital, the estimate is that about 3/4 of all capital in the United States is human capital. The rest is machinery, equipment, and everything else. But it's 3/4, okay? And why is it important is that the human capital is among the worst schools, but also the very best schools in the United States. The sad thing is that in Europe nowadays, with Britain out, there is no university in the top 20. Now we can argue about the rankings, etc., but this is indicative, okay? We go for mediocrity, we go for average. Average used to pay off. It no longer pays off. The world works that the winner takes all or almost all, okay? And that's really quite important. So if decisions are made which are not optimal decisions, if the environment is not very good for people, for business, they move, right? So the American capital can look at the Czech Republic and Europe and may not invest so much here not because it's not available. It is available, and it'll invest where it is profitable, right? The best scientists and people, etc., entrepreneurs can go anywhere in the world and do. And incidentally, going back to Trump, it's not clear, as I said, uncertainty is huge, but basically he said, everybody who graduates from a US college should get the green card. Now that's a statement which may not be true, but if it were even half true, okay?
And it's a job.
Yeah, but presumably, exactly, those people will look for jobs. If they get it, they'll stay. If they don't, they won't, and the system will keep the best. So again, it shows you sort of the difference. And look at overall statistics over the last 50 years. Europe, as it is constituted now, represented something like 30% of the world GDP. Okay? It's now below 20, heading towards 15. The US, with huge fluctuations, has kept 25%, a quarter. Okay? With the rise in China and all that kind of stuff, it has managed to keep the significant chunk, which is the result of what we're talking here in terms of the difference between the US, European, and by explication, what we can expect for the Czech Republic. So you've done well to go to the United States.
Just a small intervention, like from a moderator. So absolutely agree with Ondřej that the smart people would invent very beautiful and important things, but I am not such an optimist that we made, including the US, such a progress in storing the energy and in distributing it smartly. And I think that everyone expected much higher progress in this. But sorry, Petr is also investing into green. He's from the coal, but now he's more into green. So, Petr.
Yeah, you are right. Look, first of all, I think it's wishful thinking of some like a political streams in here in Europe to talk about the withdrawal of Paris climate treaty from Trump. I think that Trump is not willing to pay the bill on the COP and 29, 30 and similar conferences. That's about it. It's not about to like be defeated by Chinese and others in the green transition. I think there is a absolutely bipartisan support to convert American economy into to be more green as quickly as possible, but only if that supply chain is American or under American control. Undoubtedly, this transition is now more driven by capital market than by any politician. Doesn't matter who is American president, doesn't matter who is leading Brussels. If you, I did like more than 100 interviews with different investors around the world, including the biggest one in US, and the topic, what's your energy transition strategy, is essential. And if you don't have like a right answers, not bullshit answers and plans, you don't have a chance to get a capital on capital market. And it wouldn't be different with Trump. I think that Trump would be maybe more pragmatic and more like aggressive to do some out-of-the-box steps, which probably Democrats would never do. But not in a way to destroy that transition, but to support that transition, but with interest for American economy. And Democrats were not so much different. Maybe they believe more on industrial policies like Inflation Regulatory Act rather than tariffs. And there are much better economists than I am to like judge what is better for American economy at the moment. But please don't buy the story that we can be still lazy like we were last couple of decades here in Europe, and because Trump will demolish the Paris Treaty and we can still burn a coal and use the manufacturing mines and like we have in Europe. This is not the way how we can compete on the global market.
Thank you. Jiří?
With this withdrawal of the Paris Climate Treaty, that means it is a direct support for US producers, because US producers will not be under the pressure of these climate or environmental regulations. So that is pretty clear. For securing these supply chains and having them in the US and just under control, it looks like imperial policy or plays important role, and that US would like to be again number one in the world, and that is something what I really like and appreciate. But somebody has to pay for it, because with these tariffs, that means protection of somebody, which enables to increase prices, because we replace something who is competitive with, or somebody who is competitive with somebody who is less competitive. So the result will be higher price, and the inevitable result will be higher inflation. It is always in the case of imposing tariffs and protectionism. Who will be the winner? there will be producers, but consumers all over the world will pay for it, and especially in the US, if the market is so protected.
Okay, thank you. So another topic, just briefly before we open it to a question, is like, what do you expect in the field of regulating technological companies? Here I once again expect one emotional reaction from Europe, which is European Commission is currently, there's a new commission in the pipeline, but we don't expect any big ideological changes occurring because of Trump was elected. So this new commission will be very much enthusiastic to regulate these American social networks, which happen to be also big American technological companies. So the pressure against Twitter, which will have, or X, which will have more political power now, will to regulate it more from Europe will grow. On the other hand, there will be the opposite pressure in Europe than we used to have before. So US was pushing us to fight disinformation. Now the new administration would push us to for freedom, unlimited freedom of the speech on all the networks, and all the networks would be under pressure to be like X, etc. So, but another topic which is connected with that is the regulation of the market position of technological companies. All of them happen to be US companies, and a lot of these companies like Google are not exactly, or Amazon are not exactly Trump-friendly companies. So do you expect Trump to be like every other US president, that he will be defending the interests of big American companies, even though they didn't treat him perhaps well before the elections?
In a word, yes. I think regulation is an area where Trump can move perhaps the fastest. It's very easy to change the head of the SEC. It's very easy to change people heading the FAA or any other federal agency. And frankly, I expect chaos. Maybe Cameron Munter might fill us in on how change of administrations go, but I do think that Trump is disruptive. He will, I mean, you see it in some of the nominations that he's made. You know, some of the names really do raise question marks, to put it politely, about all sorts of things. But I think that is the intended effect. He really wants to splash and to make an entry. What I think is also very revealing is the debate that is going on in Washington right now over who will head the Treasury. Because one benchmark that Trump is very sensitive to is the market. He wants to make sure that there is no market crash. You know, 20% down would certainly not make his day. He would be, I think, more than upset. The stock market, yes. Well, but also the dollar, the strong dollar policy, which Treasury is responsible for, and the area of taxes, which Jan already addressed, lowering the corporate tax rate from 21 down to 15 is what he promised, and how he pays for it, whether tariffs would be sufficient to cover that. But I think, yes, he will be in favor of the large US companies. Yes, he will try to do away with as much of the regulation, and he will let Elon Musk run wild. And I think we can expect quite a shit show, if I can put it that way. Now, how far will it go? I think that really the only adult in the room that they're looking for right now, and they're having trouble finding, is really the head of Treasury. Because they want to have someone who is sane, who is stable, and who can assure the markets that it will not be a total disaster. Incidentally, Elon Musk, I think, is an interesting person, both because of the connection to the freedom of speech agenda, which is a separate topic that we could, I'm sure, spend quite a bit of time on. But, and I see Tomáš Klavania looking at me and wanting me to say that he's a madman. I wouldn't put it that way. I think people like Elon Musk are really fantastic because they really push the innovation. I think he's a very capable person, perhaps with some strange ideas, but I want to believe that over time, the sharp edges will get filed off. Maybe I'm too optimistic.
You may be too optimistic, but yeah, let's have some optimism in these pessimistic scenarios here. Let me just say I agree with Petr Pudil that sort of the trend towards green economy is there and will continue. I think that in the meantime, the deregulation that will be there will give a green light towards traditional energy sources. So I think that there will be more gas and oil production and so on, which will fuel the economy. So I think the economy, on account of that, plus other things, will actually do relatively well. And overall, the deregulation, I think, will be a big part of what Trump is trying to do. Some of it may be haphazard and may have all sorts of consequences that we cannot yet fathom. But some of it, I think, will definitely be towards allowing the free spirit, animal spirit, so to speak, of the economy to go forward. And I was surprised so far how Europe is just not reacting to it at all. The discussion that you have, the grilling of the future member of the European Commission and hear the members of the parliament, how they talk, it's still sort of going exactly the way they were going, not taking into account at all that things have changed dramatically in the United States with this election, that already people who are taking places in the various important positions will change things dramatically, that the US will be a much more competitive and competitively oriented economy. And so far, Europe is sort of sitting there, taking it, lying down without.
Energy much cheaper.
Yeah, the energy will be much cheaper on account of, among other things, the fact that the traditional sources will be allowed to go. Also, over the last several years, it has become clearer and clearer that the U.S. has large deposits of all sorts of minerals and rare earth materials, etc. So it will be able, even under a highly protectionist world, be able to produce quite a lot of things. Europe is poor in natural resources, right? So it's going to have a much harder time. It has the scale, a large number of people, but it doesn't have the complementarity of resources, including the human capital that I mentioned before.
Yeah, maybe a quick comment about the Secretary of State. I would love to see such a conversation here. Yeah, like as a Secretary of Treasury, sorry, because actually I don't remember a Minister of Finance which would care about the capital market in this country. Really, that's terrible. That's terrible. Yeah. So before criticizing Trump, and I'm not saying how big fan I am, but really we have to learn a lot from Americans about how to collaborate with the market. And regarding regulation, Jan, your question, I think that we had such a conversation in Globsec about it, and I think that we are underestimating the way how Trump is doing negotiation, and I wouldn't be surprised, and I'm not the only one who thinks that it could go that direction, that he would create some like a European package, like to put a NATO and defense agenda, regulation of big tech, especially social networks and AI, and tariffs into one basket, sooner or later, or in some stages. Yeah, I'll explain it, because first of all, he's convinced that we are not paying too much for defense. He would definitely ask for like much more money to be invested in defense. Most of the US big tech companies are extremely concerned and pissed off by the European regulation, which is gradually being published by Brussels, with obviously consent of all European members. And that's a big dispute between US and EU at the moment. And tariffs, obviously we will be very much nervous about tariffs as a European economy, because it's not only about the tariffs between US and EU. I'm much more worried about the fact that the Chinese goods, which will be disqualified from the American market, has to go somewhere because they already built that capacities. So Europe will sooner or later, probably sooner, face a big wave of the cheap imports coming to Europe, and we will be forced to react in some way. So we will be catched by Trump into his anti-China game. Even if you like it or dislike it, it would have a quite immediate impact on us. And I think that America will probably negotiate all these topics somehow in parallel. And that's a big challenge for us as a European, to be able even to take a tempo of that negotiations, because we are definitely robust elephant, but not the fastest moving elephant in the room. Yeah.
Thank you, Jiří.
Yeah, so I agree with Petr Putil that we will be forced to react. We will be forced to accommodate changes in the US. So of course, these changes are very difficult to predict. And we have very good evidence that the future is very uncertain. Have a look on the forecast of the gold prices. Yes, so the forecasts are now about $2,800 US for ounce, and so many forecasts just are saying that it will be in invisible future about $3,000. So, and it really reflects uncertainty in the global economy. With this accommodation, US approach, Trump's approach, can be a certain also role model for the rest of the world, and especially for Europe, in the fields that we are not able to cope very efficiently. One is really very sensitive, and that is immigration. With this, I don't know, removal of immigrants, it doesn't concern of the Czech Republic, but it concerns of Scandinavian countries, maybe France. So I suppose that if he succeeds with this policy, so then it could have just positive impact on Europe. Of course, it may cause another troubles on the labor market, yeah, because there is a lack of labor. That is one point. The other point is with deregulation and debureaucratization. And that is really hot topic for Europe. That is something what should address us, that we should do something, and that is possible to make something with that. Because the bureaucratization of economy is just it's on the level that we wouldn't expect and predict in the past, that we will face such troubles, and the result is a lack of our competitiveness. And the last point I would like to stress, and I was quite happy when the first who arrived to the US to congratulate to Trump to his presidential election success was Javier Milei, whom I invited this summer here, and he was in Prague on my invitation. And Javier Milei, so he could be considered to be a strange guy, but for Argentina, who went just 3 times after the World War II to bankruptcy. So there is no other treatment. And Milei, so is a good example that really shocks are sometimes important for economy. And something what is not predictable, and economic agents have to accommodate these shocks. And Petr Pudil, he showed us that they are ready to accommodate it, something of that they predicted in advance.
Ondřej has a technical.
Yeah, I'd just like to clarify that Trump is a bilateral kind of guy. He looks at Germany and he says, you know, how many cars do you export to the US? And why don't I see any US cars driving around Berlin? He's not a multilateral type. I don't think he considers Brussels to be his counterpart. I think this is a very important point to keep in mind. He will go country to country, and he only looks at the balance of trade with each specific country, which obviously from an economic point of view is total nonsense, and I will let Jan address why it's a nonsense.
Yeah, and I would just add a couple of things. One is, when you look at the data over time, trade between East Asia and the US has not deteriorated from the Trumpian standpoint that they're exporting more to us and we export less, because the Japanese and Koreans are completing production in China so much, right? So actually, yes, China-US has changed dramatically, but if you take Japan, Korea, China together and the US, it's very different. But Trump, as Ondřej correctly pointed out, looks at bilateral, right? Every country with the US, rather than the fact that we can run a deficit with some countries and surplus with other countries, right? So that's really bad, because that sort of leads you down the bad alley. On the Argentina, it's very good, sort of long historical detour. At the turn of the 19th and 20th century, Argentina, Canada, and Australia were about equally developed, right? You know what happened to Canada and Australia. They developed their advanced economies, and Argentina is not, right? So the policies that you will have, and policy that Europe will now adopt, and already the 30 years is an experience which is really poor for Europe, can make a big difference 100 years from now. So that's something that I think we need to keep in mind when we look at the current situation and where to go from here and what kind of policies. And I think the quality of leadership, of economic leadership, government leadership here and in Europe generally, is really crucial, and that's why we're interested whom Trump is going to, assign to the position of the Treasury, because that's going to have huge implications for how the U.S. is doing relative to the rest of the world.
So, thank you. So we will have a little space for 2 questions, maybe, because we have to close at some point. You want? Okay.
Just based on what Jan Švejnar said.
So if you could introduce yourself also.
Yeah, my name is Jonathan Terra. I'm an American political scientist. I've lived in Prague a long time, but I've also worked in Afghanistan and Poland and a few other places, done all kinds of things. A little bit for NATO, a little bit for the State Department. About the long-term economic outcomes, this is really interesting because the only person ever to win a Nobel Prize in economics who was a historian of economics is Douglas North. One of his big arguments was the long-term outcomes are different for many, many institutional reasons, but one is independent central banks, right? The old Spanish way of doing things was political dependency, political control of everything. So you didn't have that in the former British colonies, and voila, the data shows what that does. Back to Trump. Trump is threatening to politicize the central bank, the Federal Reserve Bank. He's threatening, right? He's threatening to do it. He is. I'm not making this up. He's threatening to do it. Whether or not he'll do it is another thing. What's your take on this, both of you? And in the different scenarios, what's your prediction? I don't think America's going to become Argentina or anything like that, but it does have real effects.
Okay, the question is clear, just but we perhaps Jan and Petr, because
So I think Ondřej and I are, like we played tennis this morning and talked about it, so I'm speaking for both of us. I think that he may try, he's been talking about it. I think it's very unlikely because both in terms of constitution and the control that Congress has over this matter, I think that in the end he would think more than twice before he would really jeopardize. And it goes back to what Ondřej was saying, that he really does want a positive economic outcome because that will throw a really good light on him. So I think that it's unlikely.
No.
I spoke a lot, but I just want to be very brief. I have a question for Ondřej. Before that, I really liked what you said, Petr Pudil, about the economic policy being seen from one angle, or maybe even as one package with technology and defense. That's really interesting to ponder. I don't know whether they really want to do that, but that would be really interesting for us to look at as a strategy. I will leave aside the impertinent remark by Ondřej that I believe that Elon Musk is nuts. I never said that. I don't believe that. But I have a question for you, which is serious. What is your honest assessment about the tariffs as a tool to really lure American production back to the United States? How high would these tariffs have to go, and in combination with the tax policy, and is that realistic?
Well, I was trying to say that tariffs are not a dirty word.
No,
I
know that. You said that several times.
Well, no, I think go back to Alexander Hamilton's argument with Jefferson. Jefferson wanted to export, tobacco and cotton and import finished goods from Europe. But Abraham Lincoln wanted to build up U.S. industry. So tariffs do have a role to play. And I would take issue with what you said in the first panel. It is not true that tariffs caused the Great Depression. It was rather a reaction to. Well, I sort of understood that. You put the two together. It was a reaction to the crash of 1929. Well, okay, then I apologize. But it is often said that, tariffs are responsible for some of the misery between the two world wars. And it is certainly true that Europe sort of broke up into separate islands. So, yes, in general, I'm in favor of trade. We all know that Portugal produces good wine, and I think importing good wine will continue. But importing key elements for the production of antibiotics, simply, you cannot be reliant on that. So tariffs have already brought investments from European car manufacturers into North America. Now there are BMW plants, Japanese plants. Some of them you might argue are just assembly points, but not quite. All of those who want to sell in North America are being forced by tariffs to contemplate or make investments in there. And I think Trump is serious because he really is looking at tariffs as a tool to get people to invest. And historically, that actually has been a successful policy.
Okay, you mentioned investment that has been there since the 1980s, right? Mercedes in South Carolina, et cetera, et cetera. So how high would these tariffs have to go to seriously impact this manufacturing base en masse?
Well, he's talking about 10 to 20%.
Is it gonna work?
Scott Bassent actually is being challenged for Treasury because apparently in an interview with the Financial Times he said that that was a maximal amount and that in fact in negotiation Trump might be more reasonable. And now he has the other half of the Republican Party sort of attack him. I think what is most interesting right now is what is happening inside the Republican clan. Forget about the Democrats. They're out in the wilderness. They're licking their wounds. They don't matter. But what does matter is what faction within the Trump clan will control. And the people whom I see in control are the people, the China bashers, the people who really see China as the key challenge for the United States. And their tariffs definitely have a role to play.
Okay, so Petr is going to be our last speaker.
A very quick comment about tariffs. I think it's also about like how much the market will trust to the consistency of that policy and the long term, like, because, you know, for me, to invest in a company in US which would start to produce pharma doesn't make any sense, because I would always compare the cost parity, the cost which I am able to get in US with what they have in China. And simply, I wouldn't believe that that policy would stay forever or a long time. So I would be very much careful to put the money at work in such a like an investment thesis. So the cost factor is very important, because it goes hand in hand with the inflation, which you mentioned. So I am not so big believer that so many like a production will be moved to United States, maybe to Mexico, maybe to some other countries than China, but the cost factor is important, and I don't believe that the market is now so like optimistic about the successful and long-term, like a long-term plan of putting them alive. So market will probably be very like reluctant to do some massive investment in US in these basic stuffs.
Thank you very much, Petr. There is Jan Mládek, but it's going to be the very last. Okay, which Kateřina? Vajzova? Okay, so we would collect 2 questions from Jan and Kateřina, and then we will have to finish. Okay.
I have just brief question about Petr mentioned that European basket. Do you expect that he will try also to load there some European position towards China? Because, and how do you expect Europe will be able to cope with that, if so?
I think that everything in Trump's view is about China. And you mentioned that the folk of people which Trump is surrounded is very much hawkish. So yes, let's expect that everything which we are talking with American will be about China. Ukraine, tech sector, defense, tariffs, water, climate, everything will be about China. I fully agree that they are really like stuck in that topic.
Yes, I would like to thank organizers for this fantastic event. I have learned a lot, but I have a question. I am confused with the answer of Mr. Pudil to Green Deal, because I honestly expected a different reaction from your side, a different answer. It's in my opinion that Europe is very rigid in those goals. And I do agree that there are money, there are technologies, and it's irreversible trend. But what is not clear, how quickly those goals will be reached. Because what China is saying, they are saying we will be carbon neutral in 2060. But wait, in the meantime, we will use fossil fuels as minimum up 2040. Now, Mr. Trump is going to the same club with America. Okay, we will fulfill decarbonization, we will deliver technologies, but in the meantime, we will use fossil fuels. Where is Europe in this picture? Because Europe is in the problem, and if the others will be more flexible than Europe, so Europe is in trouble.
First of all, the reason why we have so high energy prices in Europe is not about Trump and about the American position. It's because simply our deal with Russia collapsed. We don't have cheap fossil fuels anymore coming from Russia, first point. And a second point is that we have an absolutely stupid energy trading system in Europe. It's perfectly mentioned in the Draghi report, And I know that many people in this country wouldn't like to listen to that because so many of them are benefiting from that. But the Draghi report strongly recommends to Ursula von der Leyen to change it. If it's possible politically, I don't know. But we are a bunch of idiots which are increasing the price of the electricity by completely irrelevant trading system which we have in Europe. Just changing that would decrease the prices dramatically. If it's possible, I don't know. So I think that if we have what is the ambition in carbon neutrality, I was not speaking about it. And there is no evidence in our public reports that we would declare such a goals. I'm just saying that the technologies which are now developing by Chinese companies, by American companies are really game changers. And I fully agree what Jonas said here, that we should do our homework much more carefully to decide how our energy mix looks like, and don't buy the story that only nuclear and big nuclear plants could save us. I fully agree that there are much more technology in the market which are coming, which would be probably much more cheaper than the big nuclear.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to close it now, and I would like to thank all the panelists, Jiří Schwarz, Petr Pudil, Jan Švejnar, and Ondřej Jonáš, and I would like to thank all of you for coming and participating. I have to apologize for discussion space being so short, but next time we would get ready or better lessons learned. And I would like to thank Jiří Schwarz once again for AAU to enable us and hosting us. I would like to thank Edvard Outrata for supporting us. I would like to thank team of Strategeo, and I would like to see you at our next event. By the way, a week from now we have a discussion which will be devoted to the fall of the Iron Curtain, the anniversary of the fall of the Iron Curtain, and the end of the Cold War. And we also will have as economic panel, which I believe is going to be very lively. And that's going to be it for this year as far as our public events are concerned. But we do a lot of other activities. And so once again, thanks for coming, and see you soon.